Lee Marvin, an American actor who has worked in movies and TV shows, is one of the most well-known tough guys in Hollywood. But this talent is so much more than what you see. He did that when he got an Oscar, which you might not believe. In today's film, you'll learn the secret truth about American actor Lee Marvin and more. Come with me as we talk about Lee Marvin's early life, before he became one of the most famous stars in Hollywood. Lamont Waltman Marvin Jr. was born on February 24, 1924, in New York. His parents were Lamont Waltman Marvin, a hero of World War I, and Courtney Washington, a fashion designer. He learned to play the violin as a child, but he didn't like going to school because he had a DHD and dyslexia, which made it hard for him. In spite of this, he turned out to be a good young man. When he was a teenager, the future actor spent his weekends shooting bobwhite, deer, and wild turkeys in the Everglades, which had not yet been explored, which he enjoyed without any worries. In the 1930s, Marvin went to a Christian socialist private school in New York called Menumet School. Later, he went to Peekskill Military Academy. During his teenage years, he was a real pain. He was kicked out of a few other schools for bad behavior and vices, like smoking and getting into fights. He went to St. Leo College in St. Leo, Florida for the last time, before something happened that made him change his ways and go in a different direction. While the Second World War was going on, Marvin joined the U.S. Marine Corps on August 2, 1942, along with many other men who felt called to serve. An Army warrior, his father, whom he called the chief, wasn't too keen on the idea. But based on how he looked, boot camp was all young Marvin needed to get disciplined. He was still a bit rowdy though. When Marvin was almost done with military school, he was already a quartermaster. Marvin did some amazing things while he was in the Marines. In the Pacific Theater, he was a scout sniper in the 4th Marine Division. He even fought in the fights on Eniwetok and Saipan Tinian, which were thought to be some of the bloodiest events ever. In the fight of Saipan, Marvin was hurt when they attacked Mount Topacho as part of his service. Many of his friends and fellow soldiers died in that fight. On June 18, 1944, Marvin was hit by a bullet from a machine gun, which went through his sciatic nerve. He was also shot in the foot by an enemy shooter. He was pulled out and given medical care because of this. He spent almost a year recovering. He got better quickly, and for his bravery, he was given a medical release and the Purple Medal Heart. Along with these awards, Marvin also got the Presidential Unit Citation, the American Campaign Medal, the Combat Action Ribbon, and the World War II Victory Medal. Some pretty amazing things for a Marine with the rank of Private First Class. That was Marvin's old rank as corporal, but he was always getting into problems. It looks like you can't really take out the boy in a man. Marvin says that his time in the Marines taught him how to act, even though it was hard. When Robert Ward asked Marvin how he learned how to act, he said, "The Marines taught me how to after that. It wasn't so hard to act rough." We all know that Lee Marvin had signature white hair and was the perfect image of a tough guy. This is where Marvin's career really took off after the war. But first, make sure you hit the like and subscribe box. Now that the war was over, Marvin went back to his home country and got a job as an assistant plumber in Woodstock, New York. But as luck would have it, this was his ticket to work in show business. While working, the person who was going to be an actor was asked to fill in for another character who got sick during rehearsals. That same day, Marvin got the acting bug and became really interested in it. He also got a job at the company and now makes $1.07 a week. There were a lot of playing jobs for him before he moved to Greenwich Village in Lower Manhattan, New York, and started going to the American Theater Wing. The GI Bill, a law that helped soldiers get benefits when they returned to civilian life, paid for his acting skills. Before he became famous, Marvin played many parts without getting credit for them. His first act on stage was in the 1949 original production of the play Billy Budd. He also got a part in the 1949 play The 19th Hole of Europe that same year. After that, things started to get better, and before Marvin knew it, he had several TV parts lined up. Lee Marvin's first movie role was in the American war comedy You're in the Navy Now, which came out in 1951. He shared the screen with Jack Warden and Charles Bronson. It was also the first movie for both of the stars. Even though the movie was shot in Hollywood, Marvin chose to stay in California. He also had a small part in Fred Zimmerman's 1951 movie Teresa, which came out the same year. And this was the first time his war experience came in handy. He worked behind the scenes and helped the makers and his co-stars by showing how realistically the infantry moved. He even chimed in and helped with the gun use and the outfit. Because Lee Marvin was in the military, he was kind of forced to play a certain type of character, which is usually a man in uniform or a very powerful person. He was working on a lot of projects, some of which were pretty small. For example, he was the star of an episode of the American series Fireside Theater and another one called Rebound. Diplomatic Courier, Down Among the Sheltering Palms, We're Not Married, The Duel at Silver Creek, and Hangman's Knot are some of his other books from the past. Again, he played Men in Dress in the Western Seminole and the Korean War movie The Glory Blade, both of which came out in 1953. It turned out that Marvin was also great in westerns, so he worked on a few more westerns, including The Stranger Wore a Gun, Randolph Scott, and Gun Fury. All of these roles eventually led to his big break, which we're about to tell you about. For Lee Marvin, the 1950s were the best years of his career. That's when his role as the bad guy Vince Stone in the 1953 noir crime movie The Big Heart was praised by critics. He played with Marlon Brando in another American crime movie that same year, called The Wild One. Lee Marvin played Chino, who was in charge of the motorbike gang The Beatles. Many people liked these two movies, which showed how good Marvin was and led to more successful projects. Movie critics liked his performance in the 1955 movie Violent Saturday. One of them said that he gave the part a lot of different layers. For another movie in 1955, Not as a Stranger, Marvin got to work with Frank Sinatra. During this decade, he had many small parts in movies and TV shows, such as In a Life in the Balance, Pete Kelly's Blues, and Jane Wyman Presents the Fireside Theater. There was one show, though, where Marvin got the lead role, M Squad, where he played Frank Bollinger, a tough Chicago police officer. He became well known on TV by playing many parts and characters. There was one part, though, that really showed how good he was at what he did. Being able to play two different roles in the same movie is the best way for an actor to show off his skills. In the funny western Cat Ballou from 1965, Marvin did just that. It was based on the book The Ballad of Cat Ballou, and Marvin played opposite Jane Fonda. In 2008, the American Film Institute named it the 10th best western of all time. It's about a woman named Catherine Cat Ballou. Fonda, who hires the dangerous outlaw Kid Shillen to keep her father's ranch safe. In the end, she hires the same man to get revenge for the murder of her father, but the shooter she got isn't quite what she was hoping for. From this scene, we can see Lee Marvin playing both Kid Shillen and the cruel killer Tim Strawn. To get Frankie Ballou to leave his land, the Wolf City Development Corporation hired Strawn to kill the guy. Strawn did this without feeling bad about it. At first, Kat goes to the police for help, but she quickly learns that the sheriff is very close to Wolf City. Now she asks Kid Shillen for help. Kid Shillen is a real pain because he is an alcoholic and also funny. Kat wasn't sure if she should hire him, but she doesn't have a choice. Soon she found out why Kid Shillen was so famous. She saw him in motion and couldn't miss his crack shots. It only took a few drinks for the man to get over his withdrawal. It was great to see these two actors play such different parts. You could even say that they are played by different people. Kid Shillen is the perfect change of pace from Tim Strawn, who is scary and intense. The second one is more interesting to watch because he is more clumsy and often trips, causing his pants to fall down and pool around his legs. In the same way, it makes them wonder if he's the right person to kill the infamous Strawn. That's where Kat's love keeps him going, pushing him to be a better guy. It turns out that these two men are brothers, but they could not be more different from each other. Some people, like Strawn, are cruel and mean, but Shillen is a sensitive guy who has been hurt by the world's sins. Kat is the only person who believes in him, so he does his best to be better, even though he is in a tough spot. He was able to face his fears and then his brother because of her love. Although Lee Marvin played two very different roles on screen at the same time, it wasn't a surprise that the movie did well at the box office and was nominated for several awards. When Lee Marvin played Kid Shillen, people got to see a different side of his serious and authoritative parts. You can be sure that the star won. As for Marvin's victory speech, you won't believe what he said about a horse. The crowd laughed when he said, "I think half of this belongs to a horse somewhere out in the valley." Lee Marvin made another western after Cat Ballou. It was called The Professionals and came out in 1966 and was also a big hit. After that, he got the lead part in Major John Reisman, which was one of his most well-known movies, starring with Charles Bronson, Jim Brown, John Cassavetes, and Donald Sutherland, who were also on the credits. People already knew Lee Marvin was a big star before he won the Oscar. It gave him a lot more chances. That being said, Marvin had a lot of freedom in his 1967 movie Point Blank, in which he played a tough thief who was set on getting even. This movie and his next one, Hell in the Pacific, were both directed by John Boorman. Film critics really liked this movie even though it wasn't a big hit with most people. By the 1970s, Lee Marvin was playing less important bad guys. He was also able to try his hand at other things, though he still did a lot of westerns. Some of them were Emperor of the North, Picket Money, Monty Walsh, and The Iceman Cometh. Even though he worked with and met a lot of people, Lee Marvin is very private and picky about his friends. That's why he only talks about them a few times in the business. I can't stand myself. Marvin once said, "If I could, I'd play the same guy in every role. I don't even like being around myself. I have nothing new to say to myself. I also don't like being around other artists." How could I like them if I don't like myself? I don't get to hang out with people outside of work as much as I used to, so I spend most of my free time on movie sets with some stiffs. The stuntmen, the soundmen, and the set men. These guys in the background keep me straight. When it came to relationships, Lee Marvin was married 3 times, and one of them got messy and ended up in court, which made it a public scandal. But let's talk about his first marriage, which happened in 1952 to Betty Ebeling. They were still together for 15 wonderful years, even though they were apart for 2 years before they officially broke up in 1967. They had a son named Christopher Lamont and 3 girls named Courtney Lee, Cynthia Louise, and Claudia Leslie. Marvin began dating American actress Michelle Triola right after his breakup with Ebeling. From 1965 to 1970, she lived with him. Even though they weren't married, Triola officially changed her name to Marvin and asked for money like married people do under California's alimony law. This lawsuit, known as the Palimony lawsuit, became famous. She said Triola got pregnant with Marvin's child during the 6 years they were together. He also paid for 2 abortions, and she had a miscarriage during her other pregnancy, she said. The star also said that the abortion made it impossible for her to have children. Since the case got a lot of attention, everyone was pretty much minding their own business. The court told him to pay $104,000 for recovery, but they didn't give her half of the almost $4 million Marvin made while they lived together for 6 years. It was because arrangements for relationships other than marriage are not the same as marriage, so her claim does not cover that part. The court didn't find out for another 2 years that there was ever a non-marital contract. This meant that the award she got was thrown out and the case was over. Triola was closely linked to actor Dick Van Dyke from 1976 until she died of lung cancer in October 2009. Going back to Lee Marvin, his second and last marriage was to Pamela Feely, the girl he loved as a child. They got married in 1970 and stayed together until his unexpected death in 1987. As the Hollywood star aged, Marvin's star power decreased, and by the 1980s, he was having less and less work. The actor's last big screen part was as a sergeant in The Big Red One, an epic war movie directed by Samuel Fuller and released in 1980. After that, his other movies, like Death Hunt, Gorky Park, and Dog Day, did not do as well at the box office. The same goes for his TV shows. He played Major John Reisman again in the 1985 follow-up, The Dirty Dozen Next Mission. The story picked up where the first movie left off, even though the characters were 18 years older. In terms of his health, it's no secret that Lee Marvin had problems with drinking that were caused by his time in the war. During his life, which led to his death, one famous story about his sobriety issues happened while he was shooting The Dirty Dozen. His character, Major Reisman, was supposed to drive a truck with Charles Bronson's character, Joseph Wadaslaw. When shooting was about to begin, Lee Marvin wasn't to be found anywhere on set. It was the crew who later found him drunk at a pub and brought him back to the set. The team tried to get him sober by making him drink coffee because they still had to film the scene. Before that, an angry Bronson walked up to him and said he would kill Marvin right then and there. Thankfully he didn't, and we got to see The Dirty Dozen, which is a classic. Going back to the subject of his death, he passed away on August 29, 1987, from a heart attack. He was 63 years old. Marvin had a major intestine rupture, which made it hard for him to breathe. The doctors chose to give him steroids to help him breathe, but they ended up stopping his heart. He was in the hospital for more than 2 weeks in December 1986 because of a condition linked to coccidioidomycosis. This was months before he died. Lee Marvin was proud of his work in the Marine Corps more than his fame as a star. He was buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. There was no hint at all that he was an actor. Lee Marvin was a PFC in the Marine Corps during World War II, as written on his gravestone. Perhaps Marvin didn't care as much about his acting job as he did about serving his country, because he knew what Hollywood was really like. You'll be famous one day, and in the next one you're in foul weather. Ah, Fame Marvin used to say, your name was written on a star in the sand along Hollywood Boulevard, but when you walk down there you see dog poop on it. That really does say it all, kid.